I call to order the March 20th meeting of the Environmental Matters Committee. And let's do a roll call.
Present.
Alderman Arnett is present, and myself, I think.
Alderman Tierney is in the building, but
yes, she will be joining us later. Let's see. So
I move approval of the agenda.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move approval of the minutes.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And let's see. We can jump right to the.
Can I make a suggestion, Mr. Chair? We kind of have senior planning staff here, and I'm wondering if we shouldn't have a brief dialogue with them about how we're going to proceed on 4518, because if we're going to let them go, I would value having a conversation about how we proceed that is productive of both their time and our time, rather than have them sit through plastic bags, which I'm very interested in. So I wonder if we could just divert a little bit in the agenda to have a dialogue with the planning director and staff.
Fine with me.
Okay.
So, Mr. Gutwald, Ms. Nash, you want to come on up and we'll start off talking a bit about our 4518.
So you've been to how many committee meetings so far? 4?
This will be the 4th, yes. This will be the 4th, yep.
And for myself, I'll only speak for myself, I'm only beginning to formulate my ideas on amendments, and I also don't think this is the most efficient way to do this. It's nice to have you here listening to us and going through. On this one, it happens to be just 2 pages, right, for the implementation. But I really would value your ideas about how we can do this more efficiently for both you and us. Because I just can't see you coming to, I know rules is thinking that we're going to have 2 or 3 more meetings, and part of that is going to be collecting input from all of the other committees, and you know, if you'd like to be here, you're most welcome. Or you can watch it on TV from your office, and call in when you have comments. But I'm just worried that we're not doing this in the most efficient fashion, and I thereby welcome some input from you.
So I guess, you know, I think we determined that it has been remanded back to the Planning Commission. That is official. So my thoughts would be to, we can have a discussion. I think the chairman would like it to go through the committees at least one round, get an idea of where everybody is, of the Planning Commission. But the other thought is to get it would be more productive if we knew where you wanted changes to be made, and we can discuss those changes, or just submit those changes, and we can take that back to the Planning Commission. That's the most expeditious method. Last night at Housing and Welfare Committee, we had a discussion, but they focused on what they saw needed to be changed or wanted to be changed. We took those amendments down and we moved on. That moved fairly well last night.
Yeah, it was a good.
Tierney.
Yeah, that went very well. We basically recommended adoption of it with the 3 amendments, and then we had 4 amendments, and that was last night. Yeah.
Can we get those amendments sent to everybody on the council?
Yeah, they're not formalized yet.
Yeah, I think
you did or didn't pass them last night?
they did, but I think we're tweaking where they go
concepts.
And how they fit into the document. I think Sally's working on that right now, the specific language and where it goes. We got the general gist of what wanted to be changed and what needed to be added, but the location and where it would be in the document, if you will.
Yeah, it was all housing related.
Yeah.
Moderately priced dwelling units, diversity.
Workforce
So
housing,
is
right.
the committee done with it for the time being?
Yep, it doesn't have to come back.
You're done?
Yes.
Is transportation
what
done?
would-
So there's a lesson. No, just kidding.
Well, question though, because what would benefit you two the most at this point? Like, do you want to just hear our general observations and comments and on the list of priority solutions, or do you want us to just give you specific amendments we can talk about? I guess we'll have to, at this point, we can maybe get a specific list written up for next meeting to discuss and get to you and the planning commission at that point.
I'm thinking if you give, the more specific you are, that we can talk about whether, okay, when you're talking, so we understand the discussion can be whatever you're specifically talking about, so then we can incorporate it into the plan if we need to. To me, that's what we need to go back. If it's being remanded back to the planning commission, that's what we need to say. Here are the changes they specifically are requesting to be done in this document. I mean, I'm not hard and fast on that, because I think that the chairman of the planning commission would like to have a conversation with you as well, to discuss where they were coming from. That he would like to have that opportunity, but I think that opportunity still exists if we kind of know exactly what the specific areas where you'd like to see changed. And I think we've discussed it enough to know generally where you kind of sit and feel with it, with the plan itself, but specifically what gets to move forward. I think at least we have had a lot of discussion and back and forth, and kind of know what, I think you understand. If there's more questions that you have from me, more than willing to do all of that. I think you understand where we were coming from, to get you at a comfort level that, okay, then I want these things changed. I think we should be doing these things if that's what we're going to, so okay. I think that would be the most expeditious way to do it, is to get specifics from you guys, so we can either say, well, wait a minute, this is what the plan says here, here, and here. Does that get where you want it to go? Or we can add language here to satisfy, to get you guys to a comfort level that you feel good with the planning document.
Okay, well, all right, well, I guess if that's the case, I think we can certainly work on getting specific amendments for the next Environmental Matters Committee to discuss the next meeting.
Okay.
But I do still think there's value in today while you're here.
Sure.
We don't have to take as long, but we can still go over some of the broader comments I think that we have still on that specific section with the environment. So I know you've heard some of them, but I think it's beneficial for the rest of the committee and also the public watching, just to hear what we're thinking.
So could I suggest, so at least Sally can get away, that we go immediately to the attachment, the greening of Annapolis, those 2 pages, and the implementation section? That's what you were going to talk about, right, Sally? And then we can go back to the presentation of the plastic bags, and then come back to the update, or however else.
Do you want to start off with any kind of comments about the environmental section?
No, just the overriding theme of the environmental section was really connecting the assets that we have now, both public and private green areas, and that the synergy of these areas would be so much more than just the little pieces that are scattered around. And it's the same thing with bike lanes, looking how we can make these key connections, but applied to the greenways area. Where is it that it's, the distance between this trail and this trail are very close, and if we could just acquire this property or work with these property owners, we could have a more contiguous area. So that was one of the main goals of the Greening of Annapolis section. And also working together with our partners to further this goal and other environmental goals. So that speaks to the overall goal of the section, which is working with new development, working with private property owners, conservancy organizations to link existing spaces and create a functional greenway. That's the principal solution, the first principal solution, creating a greenway plan that really goes into more depth, identifying these places. I've talked to the Annapolis Conservancy Board, and they're already sort of doing a similar project, and I'd like to work with them to help them, and vice versa. We also want to look at opportunities to add green spaces along streets, especially Forest Drive. There's a lot of interest in, how can we get more street trees on Forest Drive? And that's, with forest conservation and developing techniques like developer fund, we can get more funding to pay for those kinds of improvements. And generally just keeping an eye in mind when we're working with different partners, how we can leverage those partnerships and get more for the environment than we would if we were just all working separately. So those are my general overriding remarks. I can go specifically if you're interested, or if there's a particular idea you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will have some specific questions, but I did want to, excuse me, talk a bit about the goal. I think the aspect I'd like to have worked into that goal, and again, I'll work on specific language on this, but is to include the idea of not just maintaining existing green spaces, but to actually be expanding, right? To try to meet our tree canopy goal, to meet our goals of improving water quality, so on and so forth. Because it seems like the focus of this has been, and I love the idea of the Greenway. We need to do the Greenway plan, but again, to work in the idea of, well, how do we increase that kind of canopy in the city, right? I think that'll help bring it more in line with some of the comp plan goals from the 2009 comp plan, because the comp plan, and that kind of works on some of my overall comments about just trying to get more synergy with some of the other environmental documents we've had, the reports, but also the other environmental commitments. So, for example, in the 2009 comp plan, they have a goal of reducing impervious surfaces. So I'd like to see, they mentioned identifying areas where we can divert stormwater flow into bioretention areas. That's what the comp plan suggests. So I'd like to have this sector study try to identify some of those areas. Where can we divert some of the stormwater? And for example, they mentioned green roofs in the study, in the comp plan. Can we look at, here are specific buildings where it may make sense to try to figure out that would be well suited for green roofs. Maybe we can give them some kind of incentive to do that. Similarly, I mentioned increasing the tree canopy already, but the goal 2.2 from the comp plan says every effort should be made to protect open space contiguous to existing natural areas to establish and protect wildlife corridors, and I think that'll be met through the Greenway goal that you mentioned, but also decreasing the city's carbon footprint. Now, while I do think a lot of the overall goals of the sector study in terms of reducing the auto-centric development will certainly work towards this goal, but I think it'd be good to have a bit more of a description in the sector study. Maybe there are other approaches, other ways to reduce carbon footprint that beyond simply reducing the need to drive as much. So those are some of the overall, because again, I want to just emphasize some of the, as you know, the results from the sector study survey, which people prioritizing traffic and environment as some of their top two concerns that they want this sector study to address. So I do think environment should be beefed up. And there's also that survey I mentioned when I was talking about I mentioned at the meeting with ANPF, the survey that the state, that OpinionWorks did for the state forest conservation bill, which made it clear. They asked people 3 questions, but the 2 of relevancy here were, it was something like, do you want to protect forest even if it means slowing down growth? And it was 87%, 88% of the people agreed with that sentiment. And so I think I'd be willing to bet, again, as I said, that night it'd be even higher for the folks in Annapolis. And so I think a part of this also is what we've been mentioning is factoring in some of the downzoning, that whole concept, how that can, on the one hand, further our environmental protection, but also, yes, it may slow down the growth, but I think that's, at least I myself am interested in slowing down the growth, and I think a lot of the residents who've reached out to me are as well. So instead of, again, because I want to kind of shift, because I feel like the sector study has been focused on a lot on kind of facilitating, not all-out encouragement, but I think it does facilitate growth and development of a certain pattern. And again, just emphasizing those 3 pillars from the original comp plan. For example, the comp plan, when it talks about the sector study, doesn't really mention growth. It mentions doing sector studies to give the public a chance to plan for the future of the particular sector in question. So again, not to plan for future growth. Like the only areas identified for growth were the opportunity areas. And so that's where I'm coming from, at least. I'd like to see that shift a little bit away from some of the growth that it's trying to plan for, more towards planning for the environmental enhancements. So let's see. So I do have specific things I can get you in the amendment in terms of some areas where there are green spaces I think that should get protected. There are some areas where, one was in Eastport, I haven't even mentioned to Ross yet, where there's a potential green space opportunity that should get identified. There's an area next to the True Value, the church building, which I've mentioned as well, I believe, where, for example, if you go behind the hardware store, it's all listed as, I think, urban center low,
R3,
the brown, forget what it is, but it's designated for a, so that's the whole lot, True Value lot, and also the church lot next door. There's all that brown community character designation, and where it doesn't really take into consideration how the whole rear of that church lot, those 2 lots, is all forest. And so I think if we allow for that frontage along Forest Drive to be built, that would be working against some of our forest conservation goals, where I think it would make more sense to direct it in the rear of that property, where there currently is the church and the open space that could be redeveloped in the future. So that's kind of it. I do have comments on the specific policies, and let's see. So I think the Greenway plan, I think, is a great suggestion. Long overdue. 3.5.2, incorporating local streets into the Greenway network. That also, I think, is a very good plan, and I definitely support the but do you have any? So that's one question I did have. I mean, what are some of the specific things that you look for Green Street design standards?
Mm-hmm. Is that, if you look in the appendix, there's a lot of ideas in that Appendix C towards the end, including some street...
C67.
Yes, some street standards that could be adopted by the city that would help us meet those goals.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
What page are you on?
C67 has Streetscape Recommendations.
Which, I still couldn't hear.
C67?
C67. C41, C35.
And Mr. Bradley, I will give you a chance to speak.
Can I sit here?
Yes, yes, please do. Yeah. So page 60, C67.
Just to ask on that, because that's sort of buried into the sector study, and it's really good stuff, but is that contingent on the county?
Well, we are working with them now on our street standards. So yes, I mean, there's a certain amount of control we would have through site design, but we would need to work with them to get those implemented as standard cross-street sections.
When you mention in that same item, retrofitting existing local streets as a part of beautification and traffic calming projects, again, good idea. But the one question I have would be funding. If there's any other separate funding mechanism you might recommend besides just simply making it a CIP project, or I don't know if any other jurisdictions have found creative ways to fund those kind of retrofits. That would be some of the useful information in round 2.
Okay.
And I liked 3.53. I'm sorry, I can let my colleagues jump in here.
I have a couple of ones that I think we'll write up, but I do have some questions about the tree banks. I feel uncertain in my mind what exactly that is or how we proceed with it. It seems like a good idea. If I am understanding it, we're going to locate some places where trees can be planted as an alternative to things that a developer would be planting on site. But I'm not really sure about that, but it's certainly something we've heard a lot about needing to do.
So which number are you looking at?
I'm on 3.5.7,
Okay.
number 23. I also don't see anything here about directing the use of our project open space money, and I know indirectly there's kind of two different tugs on that. Crab wants to use open space money for a project where they want to buy a marina, Port William Marina, and I think it's questionable, but whether they can do that or not. But the mayor wants to use open space money to purchase open spaces that can be made a part of greenways or other things, which I personally support, but we don't seem to talk about in the report use of project open space money. And so, when we go back with the Planning Commission, that would be certainly something that I would want to talk about with them. The part that really gives me some angst, really, I guess, is 18, action item 18. Through zoning changes, improve speed up, fast track the development of older existing corridor sites as well as access constrained residential frontage sites. I'm not saying that I have, what I'm going to say is I'm not sure I really understand what that means. I know this is sort of one of the steps where we convert from a study to an actual plan, where we have to do legislation for implementation. But I guess I would feel, first of all, it feels a little strange being here, since it feels more, it's talking about processing applications than, and changing facades. Now, I do see the last sentence says stormwater management, and that clearly was a big issue we were having on the stormwater management resolution. In older sites, there's only so much you can do. But it's kind of at the very end, and there's a lot of other stuff there that doesn't feel like it's directly relating to environmental issues. So I guess
right. Some of my action items apply to more than one solution.
Oh, so it was just brought over from elsewhere. Okay. Well, I guess I would like to see some method when we go back to any amendments to the report where we would have that highlighted in green or, stormwater, or blue if we're doing water. Just something, because you're right, it probably was brought over from elsewhere, and I didn't make that crosswalk. But
the idea is if we want to really encourage property owners who have existing buildings to add more stormwater management,
right,
then the idea is, what can we do to encourage them? And,
right,
we don't really have a lot of cash we can give them. So what do we have? We have zoning relief, making the process a little bit easier. That's something we can offer people
right,
as an incentive for them to invest in their property and improve things like stormwater management.
But it's part of the difficulty we got into in discussing that resolution on stormwater management, where I believe my colleague Savage and I wanted Public Works to use more discretion, but it seems to me like there's a way we can categorize, particularly in redevelopment. There's some, like the one on Main Street, where there is no more room. There's nothing you can do. In fact, they're barely making the minimum requirement. And now, with the edict, or the directive that came from Public Works, they wouldn't have met it, because now they're just jumping to the higher level. So it feels to me like we should have some way that you can evaluate or characterize particular projects and properties where this is all you get, folks, versus one where there is more latitude versus ones where it's wide open. So maybe there's some kind of a classification system that could make the Public Works staff more comfortable about asking for more rather than just now demanding more. And I think we're also focused on a 10-year storm, and one of the sentiments that came out is we've had a lot of 200 and 500-year storms recently, and so maybe we're not really focused on the right standard, or maybe there's more than one standard. So that's where, and again, as you know, Pete, I'm trying to figure out how we get from study to specifics and plans. So, but this one really caught my eye as, whoa, why is that here? So, anyway.
Yeah, I had comments on that one since we're on it. So in terms of the action item 18, I do agree with that, but I also think there need to be limits. Like for example, do we really want to fast track redevelopment if it does mean, if it's something incredibly dense or in some other manner, would it really impact infrastructure? In the sense that I think we do need to try to stay ahead of some of those developments. For example, Watergate, right? I mean, if that's something that would be fast-tracked for whatever reason, that's going to immediately overwhelm our schools and increase traffic significantly. Do we really want to fast-track that kind of...
That's what you have to look at, what your policies are, what your goal is, what you want to achieve, and what's the order of the policies that you want to implement, which one is more important than another. But that's what you have to balance between two policies that can conflict with one another.
Yeah, and also I think a connection to our APF
Right.
for that item.
That's a big one.
And in terms of the, sorry, my phone is going off. In terms of the stormwater item, I do agree, like, to incentivize some of those renovations, redevelopment, but I also think a component should be what else can we do, not only to incentivize, but require, because I think the redevelopment maybe, it's probably more of a long-term goal. How do we, because that's not going to happen relatively too quickly, I imagine. But more immediately, maybe we can use various tools, be it working with Public Works or OEP to adjust our stormwater fee, watershed restoration fund, to kind of somehow give those old developments, and it's an incentive, but it's also a requirement, some kind of requirement that they have to upgrade. They have to add some kind of stormwater management treatment within X number of years right? Because right now they have zero treatment, or else their fee's going to go up drastically. I mean, so there may be, again, some kind of connection with our watershed improvement plan, and to say, well, if there is a specific area identified in the study that has a significant amount of impervious surface, maybe that area needs to identify treatment. Because that's the one, and I think even elsewhere it's mentioned, incentivizing. I just want to see, in terms of what our options are, what can we require of some of the developers, because I know they sometimes they'll respond to the carrot, but sometimes they need the stick.
So this is...
I want to
Oh,
see if you had anything you want to say.
I have just some, I just more specific to the study, I just had some comments and whether they, and I guess in concert to what my colleagues are saying. But I do have a question. Where does it actually use the word fast track? I'm missing that.
Yes.
Where's
Page
it?
E10.
18,
Number 18.
4 lines down, it says fast track.
Where?
On page 2 of 2, action item 18, redevelopment incentive program.
Through zoning changes, develop and adopt administrative processes that can fast track redevelopment of older existing. Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't, it was taken out of context, so it sounded frightening. Just as far as environmental, because that's, I guess, what I was tasked to do, but on page 15 of the Forest Drive sector study, I think you have to expand on the idea. It reads, you have a map showing existing impervious coverage, which is great. If you, and the point here can't be lost and probably should be embellished with the recent stormwater legislation. Somehow say that these situations, well, here's what it does say. Much of the existing publicly and privately owned pavement was built before stormwater management was required, making redevelopment an environmental as well as an economic and a quality of life issue. Most of the sector's lands has already been developed or approved for development in some form, with the exception of a large wooded area on the Forest Drive Opportunity Site.
What could that be?
Infill development is ongoing to the sector. I'm just suggesting that it should be somehow known that if we have any new adaptive reuse or new redevelopment, that we are putting better stormwater measures than existing. I think you can't lose that point, especially with some of the existing impervious parking lots that may be replaced in such a development. It's just a comment that I think that should be expanded on. And then on page 17, explore underutilization of abandoned city and county rights-of-way and old railroad right-of-way. These areas form a substantial connected greenway network that should be considered further. I may be mistaken, but I think we should expand on that as well and isolate the greenway, if that's, of course I didn't print it out in color, so, but but it would be nice to have a map of the greenway possible connections. Am I missing where it probably is shown more clearer, or just to expand on that?
It is one of our community character types. So on the map on page 52, we have some of those parcels highlighted or areas.
It's sort of alluded to in that community character
Yeah.
map of how the greenways would connect.
Yeah.
Well, I think more of it would come out with the actual
Just
greenway
isolate
plan.
it. A greenway plan, isolate
I
it.
mean, ideally, I do think we should have, I wish we had that greenway plan first to help factor into all of our planning, but.
Yeah, I mean, you started on that with the, I mean, it's kind of like that Ian McHarg Design with Nature.
I'm not
which was-
blaming you, I'm just saying.
No.
I was just talking about my favorite book in college, which was Design with Nature by Ian McHarg. And, I mean, you started on that when you have the map of the pervious and an impervious, and that's, that's what, environmentally, that's what should be driving, development, is the mapping of pervious and impervious in the greenways, and just a greenway plan, and you already have the map of the impervious and the pervious. So that it's not really an amendment, but just embellishment. And then lastly was the C67. Oh, okay, we already talked about that. The streetscape project recommendations on Tyler, Bay Ridge, and Skipper's Lane. That shouldn't be. I kind of was hoping that wasn't even last. That was like a really great thing at C67. I don't know if you could move that up front to show, well, this is what the streetscape's going to look like if it happens, and if we get. So those are just my comments for like embellishment into the final product.
So I'm glad we mentioned page 52, and this is sort of going way up to the macro level to come back down to this environmental level. But one of my problems with page 52 is there isn't a page 51 that shows current conditions, so you can see how the colors change.
That shows current what?
Conditions. So what would be the current community character versus the community character that's proposing that we change to, which, as you've heard from me, it's sort of seeped out subtly around the edges, I think is upzoning and intensifying. And so what I would really propose is a page 53 and a whole aspect of this study, which would be, what if instead of considering this upzoning, what if we considered downzoning? And what would the community character maps look like if we were taking density down as opposed to taking it up? And then if we were taking density down, what are the environmental opportunities that might open up for us? So a big thing, the logic of the study as it started to me is we've got traffic problems on Forest Drive, and the solution, and you and I talked about this yesterday, is we're going to make it more dense, and we hope the mitigation is because these denser communities are going to encourage people to live and work and shop without ever getting into their car. Well, that's a great vision, it's a great hope. I'm dubious. But the other way that you can address traffic is to try to have less things in the corridor, not more. And I have to admit that I'm not sanguine on exactly how downzoning gets implemented, and because it seems to me we say, well, you're R3 now, but in the future you have to become R2. Well, that could be a long time, and maybe even never. It would have to be that somebody wants to come in and change the use of that property, and then they would have to drop to the lower Euclidean zoning kind of thing. But I do think that is something that is a whole lobe, if you will, of this study that I didn't get the sense was even considered, that one way to address traffic is to have less people or less businesses in the corridor. So, but bringing it back to this committee is, does downzoning or making things less dense present opportunities for more environmental applications, that maybe something goes from being an apartment building to being a tree bank. You know, it becomes an open space. So I think, and again, I'm looking at this study not for the amendment to 2009. I'm looking at it for the guts of the next comp plan. And that's where this, looking at, to me, if you only showed me one page out of this study, if you showed me page 52, you'd be showing me what the plan is. You would be showing me that we're changing community character, we're changing it to things that have more, potentially more dense uses, and that's fine. that's certainly a legitimate way to go, but I'd want to see one page that showed me less dense uses, and then what trickles out of that. That's a macro level change in the vision of the plan, I get it, but for the comp plan, I think that's something we really need to consider. That, and of course, you know my thing about the height of buildings in Annapolis, across Annapolis, which is another thing that helps control density. You can't go over 38 feet. I just saw a beautiful plan for a hotel on City Dock that is only 38 feet tall, and it was beautiful. Flat out, a neat concept. I can't wait for the mayor to show it to the rest of you.
So, if I'll just add a couple of comments, because I heard Alderman Savage talk about growth, and you, Alderman Arnett, talked about that this plan, and maybe it's the messaging in the plan, and that's what we need to work on. Because as you've heard me say, you know, those are all options on the table as part of this plan: downzoning, restricting development, and I always put it in the context of repurposing and refocusing the development, because what we've done in the past isn't working today. If we use the word growth, I think Sally has said this more than one time, we're not increasing densities, we're trying to, you know, manipulate the densities that are there today. You've heard me talk about the concepts of preserving areas and then refocusing development in other specific areas, and maybe those are the terminologies we need to put forth, and those are the amendments that need to be tweaked in this, to talk about the downzoning possibilities, the preservation of specific areas, so that other areas there can be, and we've been using the word investment. I won't say growth or increased density, but there would be investment in those areas where you can create those walkable neighborhoods for pedestrian and reduce traffic and trips up and down the corridor. Yeah, the focus was, as I said, you know, the first thing we started grappling is, what is this corridor going to be? Is it going to be a freeway for people to go on their way to someplace else, or is it going to be a place, and I'm not allowed to use this anymore because the city manager told me I wasn't allowed to say this anymore, but a place where we hang out. I'm not allowed to use live, work, and play anymore. She told me that. She's probably watching right now. But the concept of having people do their trips within a specific, you know, area or neighborhood and not have to drive the length of the corridor to do all those activities. And that is the concept of trying to reduce trip traffic, to enhance the possibilities of transit. I get it. You know, we talked at the Transportation Committee, the thing that's going to make transit work is convenience. So if it's convenient, and if it's not convenient, if it's going to take you 45 minutes to go 1.5 miles up the road because you're making 42 stops. So the idea is to create these opportunities for those things to occur. It's not about increasing densities, adding growth, and if that message was not presented correctly, then, you know, that's our fault, and we need to fix that. And the idea, because we heard all of that, we did. The idea was to refocus and repurpose how the corridor gets developed, and all of the things that you're talking about are options on the table to make that happen. So what I
just heard you say is, if you want everyone to stay there, you have to build a wall.
No, I did not say that.
One comment, and then I'll pass it to my colleague. But I think you're right. The messaging does need to get changed. But part of the problem is, I think, when you see that page 52 or 42, whatever it is, 52, and, you know, it's calling for, and granted, I understand this is allowed under current zoning, but it's not changing that sad fact. You know, it's when it's calling for urban center at the giant, in my backyard at the giant shopping center, which would be equivalent of, you know, you showed a picture of Parole Place out there at the giant. That makes people think more growth, more density. When it's called, and Ron is not going to like me for this comment, but out in Parole, when it's calling for urban center in the last remaining green forested headwaters for, I think that's Church Creek or Crab Creek, I get them mixed up. When that's calling for urban center on that forest, yeah, that's growth. That's growth, definitely. You can't change that. But that's an area where we should be going in the opposite direction. Say, well, that's the headwaters. Yeah, we should downzone that area for sure, a part of that, right? Because I think you can have downzoning that works for your greater goal, which I think we all agree with in terms of moving away from autocentric, development. But I also get your point where you need a certain amount of density to have functional transit. But I also I'd like to see some of the data on that, because I'm not sure we can ever achieve that density in Annapolis to have a fully self-sufficient transit department for a city our size, and where we don't have to continue to subsidize it at the level we do. I think we need to look at we could probably have a transit system based on smaller electric vehicles with a smaller density of people. So I think you could downzone and still have some of those community improvements and enhancements and shopping centers that you want. I'm not saying downzone everything to all they can do is plant trees, although maybe some places that would be a benefit. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly the messaging has gotten off track, and one thing that we are doing at tomorrow's City Council work session is we're squeezing in a talk by Alex Pline to talk about the suburbanization of cities and just sort of just sort of step back and see some of those, big issues here. But I think specific to the sector study on page 6, you've got to expand on these, obviously, because this is the meat of where you just describe the transition from the comp plan to this, and incorporating national economic trends, and if none other than the updated zoning codes, because I keep hearing down zoning, and you call it new hybrid zoning, which is sort of lost in the message already. And then the other point that you need to embellish is, and it's if you get nothing else out of this report, it's that the current zoning code encourages sprawl, basically, and split up land uses. And you say that elsewhere in the report, but if we continue on this trajectory, you're going to get Royal Farms at the corner of Tyler and Forest Drive, and maybe some people want that, but I think that just these principles have to be, talked about in crayons, like just spelled out.
We tried. I got to tell you,
yeah.
My only comment is we were taking a lot of direction from the Planning Commission on how to get the messaging out. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
Yeah.
But
We had Bob here last night.
We've
too.
learned.
Bob
Lessons
Hoffman.
learned, so,
Yeah.
to get everybody involved early and often, so...
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to go back to the growth thing again, I mean, I think some of the stuff that was put in there doesn't necessarily jive in the sense that, the economic goal, I know I'm getting out of environment, but in terms of calling for, the goal I think has to do with increasing tax base. And
Yeah.
so what do you mean, how do you increase tax base?
Well, Good.
What? Oh, I was just going to say, increasing tax base doesn't mean adding density necessarily. It means encouraging investment in existing properties, making the properties more valuable.
We just have to go here. Look, there's two ways you can increase the tax base. One is you have more density, or, and this is where I'm arguing most of our tax base growth has come, you bid up the price of the existing building. So like our single-family homes have increased in price dramatically, and I'm struggling to get data, but I think it's going to show that is where our tax base has grown the most. May not be the only growth.
No, our tax base is growing the most in commercial properties, especially our maritime industrial properties in Ward 7.
I just got something from the city manager, and I have to look at it, but since residential is 75% of the city properties or more. I think it's closer to 80. And we have not added a lot. We've added Acton's Landing, which is a mix of commercial but mostly residential. Park Place. Where's the new commercial that we're adding, as opposed to the value of commercial going up?
Well, I guess I'm going to come back to, I mean, expanding the city's tax base. Which base? I think
tax base.
everybody's focusing on property. I mean, it could be a whole host of different things that increases the city's tax base. It could be income levels. It could be sales tax. It could be a whole host of different things.
Yeah, I know, but this is talking about the SDAT data, which is our
I know
accessible
you are, but I
tax
meant
base.
in terms of the sector study, we're talking about just investment in the community. It doesn't necessarily mean increasing the property tax base. It's talking about all tax bases. It's talking about creating a diversification of those things. You know, in my
Well, but
viewpoint,
Pete, as you
so-
know, we can't do anything to change our taxes. I would love us to be able to tap into the sales tax. We can't do that. The state has to do that for us, and they won't. So they won't share that with us. The only really flexible discretionary tax that we have available to us is property tax. There's no other tax that we have that's really, you know, the hotel tax, yeah, you got to do a lot of movement to change that much.
But you're taking it out of the context of one thing of what we're talking about, and I'm trying to put it in the context of multiple different things that make a vibrant economy. I mean, if people are shopping and moving and having, you know, businesses come in and go, and people have opportunities for employment, that, you know, those are all enhancing the city's economy and their tax base. So it's not just
So I would
talking
say-
about growth or
Well, that
talking
brings to
about
light
land
that
use or
Amendment B
property.
needs more.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, I think that needs clarification, because I'm
attachment.
not, I asked that for a reason, right? I was assuming you just meant growth. If you don't, you need to specify, because I'm not the only one thinking that.
Point taken.
So, because you also mentioned, I know this is out of our area, but 3.62 talk about monitoring and report on progress. The city should set measurable goals for increasing city tax base. Like, that's where I don't recall seeing what those measurable goals, I don't think that's in here at all, unless I missed it. Look, in terms of what the measurable goals would be, because that
Is that in
would
the
give us an
strategic
idea of what you,
I think that's in the strategic economic plan, so we referenced that plan.
so that's in a different plan, okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, okay, I'll have to take a look at that separately.
I'm glad we didn't dig into this in any detail.
Yeah, right, I know. I was just thinking about
Well-
Jackie Racine.
So, I do want to continue on a bit.
Can I make one while you're looking for that?
Sure, go ahead.
Ellie, I think you made some really good points, and I hope I made some too. I would suggest within the committee, we ought to share with each other areas that we think need amending, because we're going to have to get to that at some point when we come out with the committee report. And I'm more than willing to jot down my stuff and send it to you, or send it to everybody on the car, send it to everybody. I'll send
Yeah,
it to President Trump.
Yeah, and I need to put together mine as well, and so thank you for sending that out,
Yeah.
Ellie. And so to get back to some of the specific points, and I know this is just, I'll get you the specific amendments later on, but so in 3.55, talking about using the developer fund to plant trees along Forest Drive, again, I think that is a good thing as long as but again, I don't like the idea of having this fund be refundable if the city doesn't use it in a certain amount of time.
Okay.
I think that's how it's specifically worded in one of the,
In the study.
and
Yeah, that's how it's worded in the study.
so let's see, and then I like the continued implementation of the city whip on 3.56, but again, I think it needs to be more than just encouraging, and I think again it needs to address I think the action item for 3.56, number 17, doesn't specifically speak to the whip. I think that might need a separate kind of action item, and I'll put my I'll have to see if I can come up with some ideas as
obviously,
well.
obviously, it's carrying over to a couple. It's trying to encompass a couple of
Yeah.
different policies or supporting solutions.
Yeah.
By the way, I think this points out how valuable this work is. I hope you understand while we're making comments and asking questions. I think this is such a huge step forward, particularly this implementation section, because it really has given us something we can get our teeth into. So,
Good.
Kudos. Please don't think we're,
Absolutely not. No, this is what I'm used to, is getting feedback. I wish it wasn't already introduced, I guess is
Yeah.
my point. I wish we could have had this conversation.
I think we could all agree.
Your thoughts and changes where you think things should be tweaked, or and that doesn't quite.
Yeah.
This is the same conversation we had last night at the housing. Some of the changes or the tweaks to the language were perfect. I mean, I had no problems. I mean, it's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's put that in there. So.
Well, sometimes our process works against
strange
us,
ways.
So on
in the
that
sense
note, can
that why
I
are we-
shift the diagram, the paradigm just a little bit? I would like to have this conversation about the critical area program update.
Yeah.
We did the work session, but I wouldn't want to introduce it so we can, if there's changes that we can do, we don't have to do this through an amendment
have
process.
our own work session of some kind.
So, Takia, can you? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, Pete, I'd be
First
happy
we have to read it.
to put that on the committee agenda. We could have a work session about, because I think we should be using our committees for that purpose, because you're right. I think we would all be in a much better situation if we could hash these out, and it would still be in a public forum. Yeah, so, and because I think we are, again, I think we are giving this so much attention because it is something, obviously, the public cares a lot about. At least we've been getting a lot of responses about this. So we're obligated, but we also have a lot of interest ourselves, but that's not to be taken as
I just wanted to add,
the wrong way.
I just wanted, I was just looking at my notes from what my colleague Alderman Arnett said, is the Planning Commission actually, I don't know if this is what you want, Ross, but the Planning Commission in their review, they, how the zoning or the character designations, I call them, high, medium, low, and wavy. I mean, it's like pick and choose. So they actually, I think to your point, specifically to Eastport, on their page 5, they actually changed the proposed community character designation from urban center to urban center low, and then they diagrammatically showed that. I think that's kind of what you're looking at. If you,
Yeah, no, I pretty much liked all of the Planning Commission recommendations.
they just had a good visual on it. I think
Right.
that's what you're looking for, to see what it looks like if we choose the low route.
Yeah, you're right.
So I just had two more comments on and question about 3.58, which is adjusting regulations to allow and encourage street tree and forested buffers along the corridor to create a continuous greenway. And it says, consider strengthening this as a desired mitigation measure in the city forest conservation requirements so that off-site design solutions can be considered. So I wasn't quite sure about this one. I was wondering if you could explain more. I think I understand it in terms of, I think you're saying adjust the Forest Conservation's Act, our program, so that the developers can do mitigation off-site in terms of street tree mitigation. And I think that could be, is that right?
Yeah, I think that's where you'd say, yep. Mhm.
I think that could work well. But I think it definitely needs a closer look, because we want to make sure we're not allowing developers to clear forest, yet only replacing it with tree canopy. It may be a certain percentage we can allow them to do in terms of street tree expansion.
That's in the details of the implementing legislation to me. So yeah, I mean, if you're good with the solution or the concept, then we move towards that detail of the legislation. So
Well, I'm planting a bug in your. The last thing, in terms of updating the parking requirements, I think this is a great idea as well. I was wondering, that seems like something that might be able to be made a short-term. I don't see how that would need to be midterm. I think for example, like, again, the Giant, I'm going to pick on them, the Giant Shopping Center, they have a ton of parking. I don't know if we would still hold them to that standard, and it's never completely full. What about if we identify areas like that of huge paving parking lots and make that an action item to say, well, here's some ways we can incentivize them, yes, to reduce that parking, right? If you take out X number of spots, put in a stormwater facility, we'll give you, I don't know, a break on something. But, I mean, that's kind of
We'll let
ideas
you
like
come.
That's the idea. That's
that's the kind of thing we need to look at.
Yeah, no, I'd be just give you a little history. I was the first person, from my understanding, in the state of Maryland that capped the amount of parking commercial uses could have in Harford County. We had a lot of big boxes, and they were just paving. I said, no, you can't go so far above. ULI actually asked me to come down and talk about it.
Right.
So they create these parking lots for one day out of the year, Christmas Eve. So.
Yeah.
So that's all I had. Do you have anything else, Alderwoman?
No, I was just wondering about Watergate. Random thought, is there an opportunity now to downzone just Watergate, or is that possible?
Anything's possible, but the idea, I guess, where we're headed with...
That's not in any sort of study. It's not really related to the Forest Drive sector study.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as
page
hybrid,
52.
I meant as far as the concept.
So-
it's a given structure.
It's on
and
the
you're gonna-
map.
What is that?
It's on the
The
map.
council can act on anything that they want to. I mean, if I'm thinking the zoning code,
I mean, what we do
typically
is
what you
we-
try to do is you initiate a comprehensive zoning review process. The other process is a piecemeal process, what we casually call a piecemeal process, where you argue change or mistake in the neighborhood. All of that is contingent upon that the council either mistakenly rezoned it, or there was a change that the council did since it was rezoned as to why it should be something else. So I don't think yes, in a sector study would initiate that change.
Okay, so
But-
that you can relate it that way.
Typically, you would look at a lot of the stuff, and my goal is to look at the city comprehensively again. as
Yeah.
My favorite line, 31 zoning classifications, we're the Baskin-Robbins of zoning, and 5 overlays. So the objective, and this is, to me, laying the groundwork as well, the
Okay, so the
comprehensive
thought
plan.
process, because I know it's a hot topic, and I didn't know if it could wait. All right, thank you.
Is there anything else?
No.
I'd like to invite the public before you leave. Mr. Bradley, if you'd like to get a mic, can we get him? Thank you. And welcome to make any comments or
Yeah. I'd just
questions.
like to know, I'm a little bit bemused about the whole sector plan study process. It seems to me that one of the principal
Earl, please
impacts-
state your name for the,
What?
state your name and address for the record, please.
Name and address.
Oh, my name and address. I'm Earl Bradley. I live at 940 Bay Forest Court, apartment 306, Annapolis, Maryland, 21403. Probably the southeastern corner of the city, just behind the Bay Ridge Giant. So I am officially member of the city.
Can you give us your elevation?
At least with some old members of the previous council,
Attitude and
whether you were a
longitude.
citizen or not a citizen, seems to impact how seriously your comments were taken. But getting rid of that virus. But my understanding, the sector study was to address, first of all, a little bit more detailed on the opportunity areas listed in the previous comprehensive plan, and also to address the traffic problems we have, transportation problems we have on Forest Drive, and then also, I guess, it's turned out almost to be a mini comprehensive plan, bring up some fairly different zoning ideas that are better handled in the overall comprehensive planning process rather than the sector plan. I'm afraid if the sector plan is adopted, it will sort of give bias to adoption of those as official city policy for future development in the area. And I think they need a lot more thought before anything goes on the new type of zoning that the plan proposes.
Can you, would you, I think it's more than a bias, although Director Gottwald...
Could you speak up a little bit? I'm having...
I think it's more than just a bias, although I'm not sure that I see it exactly the same. My understanding is if it's adopted into the 2009 plan, it is adopted. And it is now the map on page 52 is adopted. It doesn't mean that it's implemented in zoning code or anything,
Yeah.
but it's adopted as a policy of the comprehensive plan. So I believe that this study has some biases, all of them do, but if we pass the resolution, it would be policy.
Yeah, and that's what scares the life out of me. And I think I don't see the really legal basis for this or why we're doing it. There's two opportunity areas were really identified in the old comprehensive plan. One is the Crystal Springs Forest area, which is hopefully going to be resolved as a separate matter in the not too distant future. And the other one is a small area just on the far side of Forest Drive, just south of, I guess, a Bay Giant shopping center. And now we have this whole massive rezoning of the entire corridor, not recognizing that type of existing development that goes there without, with resistance from most of the existing residents of the area. I live in, just behind the Bay Ridge Giant, and that whole area is identified as one of the prime opportunity areas for major new, more intense development. But it includes, my senior housing development I live in, all the other senior housing along Edgewood Drive, a number of townhouses, existing townhouses development, and detached home areas. And there doesn't seem to be any recognition of that people in the area don't want major changes to their area. But this plan concept and everything, the zoning doesn't have any traditional residential zoning left. As I view it, everything is going to be some type of urban, that's more intense urban development in an area that a lot of people moved in there because it was more suburban development. And the plan also talks about providing a great need for additional services to people living in the area. But just in the giant area, we have the grocery store, we have a coffee shop, we have several food services, the Chinese restaurant and the pizza place, and that sort of thing. So, across the street just down, we have a Mexican restaurant and several other in the corridor. I do not know what type of new food services people really see occurring in there. If they want to go to a real fancy place, it's probably not going to be to a restaurant in Forest Drive. So I think this concept of having these new urban village places that people are going to stay in and do all their businesses there, including working, but I don't know what sort of additional really employment purposes they have than just some people working at the Crystal Springs new community care facilities. I think the plan doesn't recognize the reality of the existing development and character of development in the area and what the people rise. I went to all the public hearings on the plan, and there was no outcry that we want to be more urban. We want to have higher buildings, more than 3 stories high. And that's what we see being thrust down the road. And we feel if the study is approved as planned, it really commits us to a future we don't want. And I think that's a basic sort of thing. I don't know whether this is the right format to make those comments, but I think basically we're sort of almost adopting a mini comprehensive plan now before the official comprehensive plan goes. Also, they refer to a lot of proposed road improvements. But no, a lot of those were the same that was adopted 9 years ago, but there's no money has been put forth from them. I don't see any real enhancement of great funds to improve major new improvements in the corridor, and especially since it's not a high priority corridor as far as the county goes. So I think that's really, we're taking a small mandate from a 9-year-old comprehensive plan, and we're trying to make major changes in the whole ideas of how development should occur in the city, and have that concept adopted before we even consider how relevant it is to various portions of the city, which I would hope a lot more of this would be done in the comprehensive plan. But I feel you're really almost looking like a Trojan horse and getting this major new zoning concept adopted as city policy, and then going in and saying, hey, we're going to implement this through the new comprehensive plan. I don't think there's any major discussion as we've been had on this. This plan covers 65% of the city, so it's not really a sector study as much as a mini comprehensive plan.
Well, thanks, Aaron.
And then I have a few quick comments
Can I?
on the Forest Drive corridor, but go ahead.
Well, I wanted to respond in a couple ways. I think you're right. It's almost like, is Forest Drive a thoroughfare or is it a local road? It's both. This is a study that was called for in the comprehensive plan. This satisfies those requirements, but it is really, and that's why I think you're seeing the council take this so seriously. Every one of my colleagues is taking this very seriously because we realize it's the predicate for the next comp plan. And actually, in many ways, it's a very good predicate. There's a lot of substance here that will lay the basis for not only the next comp plan, but the whole next legislative agenda. But like you, and you heard my somewhat misquoted but intemperate comments about throw it in the trash that was in the Capitol, there's a lot of anxiety that this is causing, and I'm feeling it a lot from my constituents. I think many of us are. And so you're not out of step in terms of being concerned, but I think I choose to take this on as an opportunity to really come up with something that is much better, something that the council, the planning commission, and the community are all getting heavily invested in, and I think that will be a good thing. And we can have, so we can, just like I mentioned earlier, we can have an alternative for, if you're going to accept that characterization, upzoning, and we can have an alternative for downzoning. And we can look at that impacts across all of these implementation things, including mobility, including environment, and so forth. So I'm changing my course and taking a positive attitude towards this, and I would encourage you to think of it this way. And by the way, thank you for coming out. We really do need to have a lot of citizen input. But I'm thinking this is a tremendous opportunity for us to work on something that can be really good.
I wouldn't have any problem with this being a good, considered a good background report, providing some concepts that should be given seriously considered in the development of the new comprehensive plan, but not given any approval of the concepts at this point in time, but just that using the Forest Drive and East Fort as sort of a case study area, and then how, give some real thought to how that might be built upon in developing the comprehensive plan, but don't make any sense in the case that we want to have just the urban size development, which are more streetscapes zoning rather than any traditional zoning. I think that has some merit if incorporated with some of the concept, but shouldn't be the primary way of addressing new development,
And
without giving a lot more thought and a lot more buy-in by the people who live there.
well, and I think that Mr. Bradley does bring up a good point, a good idea. Because I have had people, again, who live on Cypress who had all these red flags. Oh, the city's going to purchase my property and build businesses. I'm like, no, that's not what they're. But the point is, if they weren't reached out when this directly impacts some residential neighborhoods, I think that'd be good to do. But the point he brings up, which I think might be a good idea, would be, I think people are getting hung up on this being included in as an amendment to the 2009 comp plan. So if we can't amend this to a point where everybody's comfortable, maybe we should we just go ahead and adopt it as, not as an amendment, but just adopt it as it is, as a study, as a precursor to the comp. Maybe that's a way to kind of get around some of the concerns people have, but it'll still lay the groundwork, hopefully positively, for the comp plan. I mean,
Yeah, and I think
would that be objectionable to
That I couldn't said it any better. That's really what it is. I mean, sit there and say it's. I mean, we have to, because that's what the law kind of says. The sector study is supposed to be. That's what the 2009 comprehensive plan says. That's why you're doing it, to become part of that. But practicality, it is a precursor to the next comprehensive plan. And I'm not disagreeing with what everybody's saying. We're going to have to pull a lot of these, if we want for this stuff to be implemented, we're going to have to pull it into the new comp plan. There's this philosophy when I got here where I scratched my head where people were reporting were quoting studies that were done in the 90s and 80s and using that as justification for their Board of Appeals case. And I'm going, what? I mean, we've had 2 comprehensive plans since then. How are you using that? If it was still important, it should have been brought forward through the next comprehensive plan. So from a practical standpoint, what's important in here will go forward into the next comprehensive plan, and I get it that you. So however that word or language can be done, I'm all ears, yeah.
I think there's 2 other concepts I think some other people brought up.
Mr. Bradley, hold on a sec.
Back to my,
Earl.
just brief, yeah?
Hold on a sec. Alderman Maternity wanted to have, I'll turn it back to you, but I want to.
Well, I think it is important to discuss this because I think ultimately, I think ultimately what, I know it's going through committees and they're constructive and you'll be refining it or whatever, but I think ultimately the council has to work as a team and amend the language in the resolution to say exactly what my colleague said, to use these concepts to carry into the comp plan, and I think that's something that we could work on. But the other thing is, it's interesting because more specific to my ward, I had the city dock master plan, and the lessons learned with that is, I remember, and Sally does too, I would say, where's my promenade? There's supposed to be a promenade, because that was in the plan, and the step that has to happen is codification. I mean, these can be principles, but they're not codified. am I correct in saying that? So it scares people because they look at this and say, oh my God, gives you the red light to build. And it doesn't at all. It's, the first step is to pick, and decide, and then rewrite the zoning code to this hybrid zoning concept. So it's a process. But I don't think that that's clear. And I mean, here's the other thing. Maybe you can explain better. If this were, using the word adopted with amendments after committee review, why don't you speak to what would be your next step?
Are you asking what the word should be in terms of the resolution, or are you looking at what the next step?
What you would do with this study?
What we would do with this study?
You would then just carry it over, incorporate it into 2020 comp plan?
Yes. For the most part, we would probably carry it over either by reference or carry over the specific language.
Yeah.
But the other step would be if there's low-hanging fruit that we could, Alderman Savage mentioned, I don't know why we have to wait for this study for some of these things to occur. So
Right.
Some of the low-hanging fruit we would try implement.
Yeah.
The idea is if we got the council buy-in on these policies and these directions, whether it's adopted or accepted, that gives me direction of what to do and what to put together in terms of a work plan for the department to put in front of you.
So we probably should work with the law office in looking at language that does just that, but still go through these committees to get
I think the benefit of going, I'm sorry to interrupt,
No,
the benefit of going through the committees is at least I now have good direction as what could be accepted. If this never gets adopted and we move toward the comprehensive plan, I know where everybody's thinking is, where it sits and where the direction we should be moving in the comprehensive plan. It gives me comfort in the direction I'm going, because I thought I knew where I was going.
Thank you.
Happens to us too, with legislation. All right, so I really want to move on to OEP, who's been waiting patiently. I know we have somebody giving a presentation.
Yeah, we shortcut this whole discussion.
I know.
It was only an hour and a half.
But Earl, I also don't want to cut you off. But just to let you know, I will give the public a chance to speak at the next Environmental Committee meeting when we talk about how to specifically we may want to amend this. But is there anything else, any other points you want to get out quickly today about this?
Well, I guess we have some other concepts we'd like to submit in writing to you for your consideration.
Okay.
Because I don't want to take up too many people's time. And then what clear is the process for further consideration of the sector study, and whether or not I really have to develop a lot of people in my community to come out and say, no, we won't want a study at this time, committing themselves to this new time of development, saying that we want new development without deciding which is really cost effective in the long run. But it's likely going to cause increased traffic congestion unless there's money to put in the road improvements, unless people can come up with a viable mass transit process, because the opportunities for new residential development are really very limited in the Forest Drive corridor unless there's a radical change of putting apartment buildings or other things and redeveloped areas, which I don't think is going to happen. So
I think we've now seen a signed document. We've sent the study back to the Planning Commission with some questions. We're going to be developing even more questions that we're going to ask them to be thinking about. So that's going to reopen the process with the Planning Commission and their public hearing, and then it'll come back to the council. So I think you can tell your neighbors and so forth that we're all taking this very seriously, and we're not going to rush this to some kind of closure. So there will be more opportunities, both at the Planning Commission.
So we're holding patent until the Planning Commission reviews your comments and decides what they're going to do with them. Is that what you're really saying?
I'm saying that we've already had enough questions that we want to go back to the planning commission and have further deliberation. And so that has been officially sent back to them. And then we're hoping to have a joint meeting with the council and the planning commission where I have oodles of questions, and have some kind of deliberation. That'll be all an open process, and public will be able to comment, so forth. So I guess what I'm telling you this for is we're not rushing this to judgment.
I'll just keep me powder dry and wait for the next.
Yeah.
All right. I'm
Event.
gonna cut off the discussion. Thank you for coming out and spending an hour and a half with us. Is there any, Mr. Gall, before you go,
He's got to give us the update.
is there anything else, any big development update?
Oh, yeah.
Say that there really isn't any changes from last month.
Oh, okay, so I'll entertain a motion to postpone action.
Yes, I move that we postpone action for further endless meetings.
I'll second. All those in favor? Aye. All those in favor?
No.
It's like one.
Aye.
Aye, okay.
I don't have anything else to add.
All right. So, Pete, there's nothing new.
No, unless you guys had questions, as you know, with Village of Providence Point, that was the one that was submitted last month. We're still under review. We haven't gotten all our comments in yet, so it's still, going through the.
Have you given them the new technical manual?
I have.
Okay.
Good.
Have you heard back
On the
from them?
website? I have not. A couple of phone calls, but I haven't returned them yet.
Thank you. I have taken a quick look at it, and thank you for all your work, you and OEP for on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And next up, Director Gild, Ms. Hodo, and unknown person.
I apologize. I
Tracy,
really
you're welcome
thought
to
we
join us
we
if
could
you
make
want.
this other one quicker than it was.
Yes, I don't know if they have copies of them. I want to introduce, good afternoon, I'm Jackie Guile, the Director of the Office of Environmental Policy, and I wish to introduce to you Ashley Genovich, who is our OEP intern. She's pursuing a master's in public administration from the University, from North Carolina State University, correct?
But after seeing...
Oh, from North Carolina, from UNC, I almost said UNC. From
Masters
UNC.
in what?
A master's in public administration.
Oh.
And so,
Still, even after sitting through this?
after this, she's,
But after seeing this meeting, you're changing your major?
I'm thinking that I was going to have to do this in like Shakespeare in 60 seconds kind of deal. Like the whole time I was like, okay. And then it was interesting, and it's an experience, and it's real, so I appreciate it.
so we asked Ashley to explore bag bills in other neighboring jurisdictions and in some other states because this committee expressed some interest in other pollution prevention legislation, and so we did this as an exploratory measure for your consideration.
So one of the things that I really just focused on were the counties in Maryland and if there were any that had present bag bills. So DC actually has the longest standing bag bill. It was passed in 2009. It is a 5-cent tax on paper and plastic. So the chart that Jackie and Racine helped me create kind of just outlines the measures that have been attempted, whether they are from 2000 to more present, and I think it's Howard County actually just passed legislation last year that's supposed to be enacted at the end of this year for another 5-cent tax. But really there's only 3 counties, well 2 if you count DC and Maryland, that have taken action on it. But nationwide it's really becoming more of a hot topic. Between 2017 and 2018, there were 73 bills that were presented through county and state legislators. In 2019, there's already 93. So it is something that a lot of communities are starting to look into, specifically ones that have big watersheds, which for Anne Arundel County, having the Severn River and being directly connected to the Chesapeake Bay is something that environmentally friendly, conscious, you want to look into. As far as the bans and taxes, there have been pretty positive results. DC saw a pretty fast participation from citizens within the first, I think, 6 months they did a study, and 75% of people said they kind of stopped using plastic bags at the store and were bringing their own. Because of the tax, let's see, I think the most recent data was 2010. They generated 1.3 million in revenue. It was a little tricksy because they had anticipated 3.6 million in revenue, but when you look at what the bill was actually supposed to do, which was reduce plastic bag use, it was successful. And the money from that tax goes into environmental fund for the Anacostia River. So a lot of the different states have them hooked up to either general funds or environmental funds that are directly related to trying to remove and reduce either plastics or paper into water streams and just in general areas.
Well, I do have a few questions, and thank you so much for putting together this research. It's always a big help to have people help with, putting together comparisons about what other jurisdictions have done. Just because this is supposed to be a part-time job for us, but it's really tough to fit in everything we're supposed to do. So, nationwide, what has been the trend? Because it seems like they're split between, in Maryland anyway, mostly fee-based, fee on the plastic bags as opposed to a ban, but is there any kind of difference in the nationally?
There really isn't. I think it depends on the demographics. Like when you look at California or Hawaii, they impose bans on plastic bags. But I think if you look at the policies that are pretty typical in California, you're looking at a lot of people who are on board with environmental legislation. And Hawaii too, not only because of the tourism, but because of the local roots, that was a huge movement there. That was pretty quick to be, introduced and passed. As far as the taxing and bans, I think it depends on the citizens and how it's presented. There was a lot of, I would say, negative pushback in cities like Baltimore, where they kind of just said it was going to be a tax, and they didn't really tell the citizens how the money was going to be used. They tried to set up a website to sort of encourage retailers to sign up and pledge to reduce plastic, but then the website didn't work. So it was kind of, like the little stop and go projects. I think for the most part, it's the county members and state legislators who are kind of deciding, if they want to try and generate taxes to go towards environmental funds, or if they're just trying to eliminate it right off the bat. And for Maryland in particular, it was interesting. We have a couple of plastic bag manufacturers and distributors. Some of them, I think, there's some in like Silver Springs, Beltsville. There's even one in Annapolis, Calico Industries, and they're a manufacturer of plastic bags. So obviously some of them vary in size. So I think that also is something, and it takes oil to make plastic bags. So if you look at states like Texas, there's only a couple of small counties and cities that have opted for things like bans or taxes, but I don't think there's a persistent pattern either way.
So it seems like bans have been more difficult to enact?
I think so, because then you have businesses coming into play, and by businesses I mean the plastic manufacturers. When I was doing my research, you can actually go to lobbying websites for plastic bags, and there they cite data from the EPA, but then when you go to look at that data, it's not linked correctly, it's not available. There is definitely a back campaign to stop people from even attempting to ban plastic bags.
If you've come across any kind of useful information that jurisdictions have used to support their efforts to either ban or put a fee and reduce the usage, that would certainly be of use to us, because I think there seems to be interest to do something at the city in terms of what exactly still is to be determined. I have more, but I'll open up the floor to ladies first.
Thank you very much for this research. I have a question. We're dealing with the city of Annapolis, so we can't tax, so that sort of limits that. So I'm intrigued, and I always was, with the DC model, because it goes to the Anacostia, and ours could go to the Bay, and what could be more. But what I don't understand is what, from the store perspective, is this some kind of a donation on their part? I mean, what is the financial implications on the store side? What happens there? I know that the patron buys, opts to buy the bag, but what's the economics, I guess?
Yeah, it was really hard to find monetary trails, I guess, if you will, for retailers and how much they were spending on plastic bags or even paper bags. So that's kind of the first step. The retailer will partner with the distributor. They'll buy their plastic bags. For places like DC, the 5% tax, I think the 5-cent tax.
Just called a surcharge, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's 2 cents or 1 cent. Yeah, 2 cents or 1 cent goes back to the retailer, and then the rest goes to the Anacostia Fund. So to be perfectly honest, I did not look heavily into the financial aspect because
just concept. I was just wondering if the retailer loses money. I mean, does he have to really buy into this?
No,
it's not a hardship to the retailer.
Yeah, if anything, they would save money because they do not have to pay for plastic or paper bags.
So it offsets their cost of buying them.
So they would be spending less on it. But then that's where the plastic bag distributors come in.
They'll lobby to.
Yeah.
And then if the other issue is we're city versus county, so if Safeway inside the city would be doing it, but outside the city they wouldn't be doing it, and I'm sure that's applicable. No, probably not elsewhere. I don't know. But I don't. It just sounds like a great model.
The DC.
The DC one, yeah.
Alderman Arnett?
So I have a couple questions about the construction of the table, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the Annapolis paper bag. But I'm assuming that the dark O or dark circle is that they do tax in the tax column?
That was that they attempted.
Okay. And in the band, there's a light shaded and dark shaded. Is that just how it came out? Or?
I think, that's just how it came out.
So it's interesting that Anne Arundel seems to have passed something which is neither a tax nor a ban. It seems to me they're handling it at the trash collection level.
That was another commonality. Waste management, trash facilities are no longer accepting plastic bags because even with the recycling equipment, it jams up the equipment. It also takes up more space in the landfills and prevents decomposition. So it was an interesting factor, and it kind of got me even more confused on why.
There's something I want to add there. Apparently, because you have to separate out the plastic bags, oftentimes what Waste Management has been observed to do is just to chuck whole trash cans where they see plastic bags. They're not going to do the sorting. Right. So you have things that are in there that could be recycled but aren't because they see the plastic bags, so they won't waste their time with it. They'll
it's
just
interesting.
Chuck it.
We just got a postcard from the city showing, and I went to I don't know if you've been to the recycling plant in Lathamville or whatever it is. They actually have to hire people to pull the bags apart and dump the trash. And in terms of plastic bags, part of the experience in 2007 was it's not just plastic bags that are bad for the environment, so are paper bags. And paper bags may actually be more environmentally damaging at the production phase than plastic is at the production phase. They do disintegrate. So, but So one of the things we tried to work with when the council was doing this was, well, maybe it's bring your own bags, which I have a truck full of bags, paper, plastic, cloth bags to take into the grocery store, which I rarely ever remember to do, but my wife does. And so we were really trying to figure out ways we can encourage people to have their own reusable cloth bag for their shopping. Now that works reasonably well for groceries, but when you're going to the drugstore and picking up stuff, I don't know how many people would remember to do it. But I guess the real question is, we could only fine. We didn't have the power to, we tried to pass a fee that said to the grocery stores, you have to charge 5 cents for paper bags or plastic bags, which of course they didn't like and fought. And we had both the paper manufacturing people and the plastic manufacturing people arguing not only why we shouldn't do their product, but why we should do the other guy's product. So, and it just got so terribly confused and controversial that we ended up doing nothing. But I think this is a different time. There are so many other people doing it, and we've seen so many pictures of acres of floating plastic in the Pacific Ocean and turtles with things around their neck and all of that stuff. I think people are much more sensitized to the need to go after that. And I'm willing to take plastic now and paper later. So again, as Alderman Tierney said, this is nice information and a good basis, but is this going to be followed by some draft legislation?
Well, we performed the research to provide to you to see if you were interested in. If you would like further research to be done in support of draft legislation, then we have Ashley on our staff through May, I believe. Yeah. And we can always have other interns as well. I didn't know if you want us to take a crack at legislation or if that's something that's within your committee to come up with.
I think we would benefit to have a specific work session, or committee work session on
I
that.
think we should have more controversial legislation on at the same time. It'll wear people out.
Let's see, I got parking.
Well, because I think if we did want to get legislation drafted, we would need to provide, I think, some more direction in terms of, because there are a lot of different approaches.
But Ashley is a good resource, and she can go back to look at all of the records. I'm assuming they're still around from 2007. But I would really like to have advice from her, because are we going to charge a fee? Are we going to charge a fine? We can't do a tax unless we get empowered by the state. And I'd kind of like to see, it's interesting, Anne Arundel County does neither fee nor ban, and yet they seem to think they have plastic bags. I'd be interested in seeing what their experience is.
I think that the county is interested in pursuing a plastic ban as well.
Under the new
That's what the thinking is right now.
Yeah,
this would have to, if legislation was passed, it would also have to have a public education component to it as well. We'd have to get behavior change. The idea of handing out bags is a good one. People start carrying them in their car. Once you start imposing a tax, as it happened in DC, people start putting them, a fee. People start getting into the habit of carrying them in their car, keeping them on the door of their apartment building.
Right.
I have family in DC, and they converted over very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just thinking one of the criteria in selecting a model is really the legal implication. So perhaps Ashley could at least say what we could or couldn't do within a legal framework, and that would help us immensely before we, zero in on it more.
Yeah, so the basic question on if we could place a fee that would go towards the watershed restoration fund, for example, unless there's some other fund that we might think would be appropriate, but
I don't know.
Well, a lot of them are geared towards waterway restoration, such as in DC. It's for the restoration of the Anacostia River, so we could devote it to the Annapolis waterways.
Annapolis Water.
So cleanup
To the,
efforts.
probably to the existing fund, the watershed restoration fund.
Right, the Watershed Restoration Fund.
I didn't even know, I'm sorry, I didn't even know DC did both plastic and paper.
So they have a fee on both. Yeah, I didn't realize that either. So are there any other, have jurisdictions placed restrictions on, for example, or have they made exemptions for compostable plastic or biodegradable plastic? I know there's a difference.
There are some states where if the bag composition is like 75% compostable, then they are allowed to have that without inducing any kind of fee. It really depends on the legislation. Some of them do not even have any fees in place. It just has to reach that percent of compostability and it's good to go. Other places, it really depends, I think, on the paper point that you brought up earlier is 100% true. I mean, there is a lot of research, and some people, retailers, offer to go with the paper bag because they do recognize it as being more dissolvable. So therefore, it's less likely to clog up storm drains, really wreak havoc on the environment. But then the beginning process is something to take a closer look at as well.
Unless it's made from recycled materials or something like that.
Well,
But I know even when you last spoke about this, 2007, I guess it was, even back then there was a concern that some of the plastic bags considered biodegradable, or I'm trying to think the term, but they weren't truly biodegradable. They just essentially broke down in smaller microplastics.
Pieces,
right.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it might be, and I mean, for me, I think I'd leaning towards focusing more on the plastic paper bags. I'm not as concerned about, but.
Well, so what was really interesting back then, Sam Shropshire was using a university study that was just slamming plastics. And so I asked him, could we get a copy of the study? And I started looking at the study, and it turned out that it was the University of Sweden. And then we started looking at it more closely. What is the single biggest product that Sweden produces? Trees and paper pulp. So of course they were slamming plastic, and then when you started checking their references, it turned out that a lot of the experts that they were citing were not particularly expert, or when you read what they were relying, they weren't nearly as black and white as the study made you seem. So you have to be careful about what you're looking at in terms of scientific support. And I think that probably more than anything else, I probably killed it, because we can't just accept this. It's so highly biased. And I think people just got tired of it. And the stores really complained about it because of all the nuisance of keeping track of the 5 cents and so forth. And I don't even remember whether we settled on 5 cents or 10 cents. We settled on the fine, but I don't remember what we were going to do. But we wanted the cost per bag to be significant enough that after you did your shopping and then you saw $4 added onto your bill, you would say, if I brought in my own bag, I could save $4.
Well, and that'd be kind of useful research to have related to how much the fees, so we know how much is raised in DC, but can we use that data to come up with an estimate in terms of how much that might raise for Annapolis, and how much that might, if it has, it sounds like it hasn't resulted in much of a cost for the grocery stores, and it may have even led to some cost savings. So if we can just get a number like per grocery store and then figure out how many are in Annapolis, we might be able to get that kind of number. But in terms of the committee, do you have thoughts on like a fee versus a ban, an all-out ban?
Yes.
Well, I kind of want Howard County to be the guinea pig here. I'm sorry, I was reading that quickly, and it's interesting. I didn't realize that if you ban the dynamic in Howard County, the proposal is to ban plastic, and then the retailers are objecting, saying, well, it costs us more to just use paper, so it gives a reason to ban them both. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And
That's where we came down.
So that's kind of interesting to look at. Is it? But I mean, I'm sorry. I shop everywhere because I own a bed and breakfast. But I mean, you go. It's almost like the grocery stores are waiting for us to do this. I mean, you go to any grocery store now and they've got their bag, their bag waiting for you to buy. I mean, Trader Joe's, they're 99 cents,
Yeah.
and if I forget mine, I'll buy another one because I feel bad about the bag. You know what I mean? I think it's just
Yeah.
the public is. I think the public support would be there. I just don't know, again, the legality specific to Annapolis. And
Would it be helpful if I had a legal intern who could do some research into that for you on the legality of that? I'm sure I can get a student from all of our many law schools around here to do that.
could we help them at least zero in on a model, like whether it would be, what do we call it? A 5-cent fee, the 5-cent fee model, or?
I think it needs to be higher than 5 cents.
Oh,
To be effective. I mean, if you have $1 at the end of your grocery bill, you bought $200 worth of groceries and you have $1. But if you start having some noticeable thing, and that was one of the other things, the grocery stores legitimately were saying, we don't have a button on our registers to record this fee, so we're going to have to reprogram their cash registers to come up with the calculating the fee. And the checkout people had to start counting the bags, because you know how sometimes they'll just throw one thing in the bag, and then so you don't really even fill up the bag. So you can see the customer saying, no, put more in that bag.
yeah, stuff it up.
So the ban is actually easier to implement. There is no plastic, and there is no fee. You just can't have plastic. Then the question is, are you going to go after paper next? But ban, and again, we'd need to know what authority we have. We banned phosphates in the fertilizers. There were only 3 outlets selling it in the city anyway, True Value being one of them, Jared's place. But, you know, ban on plastic is, you know, a ban on straws. And all of those things are, I think, going to be more effective in terms of the retail outlets are not going to want to take a chance. So, you know, if you have a fine of $500 or $5,000, that's going to discourage them from trying to skirt around it. So there are a lot of things on fees that are harder to make happen than there is on outright ban.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on what the ultimate goal is. If it's simply to change consumer behavior, well, I mean, the ultimate goal is to reduce the waste. But in terms of how do we get there? Do we get there by doing what we can to influence consumer behavior, shopper behavior, with a fee that is high enough and advertised enough to kind of be a deterrent? Or do we just bypass the consumer end and just do the ban, which is done on the grocer level? Although that has not been done in Maryland, it sounds like, successfully, right? A ban has not been done.
Actually, I think Chestertown, Maryland has a ban on plastic bags. I think I just came across that. It's not on the chart.
Okay, yeah, if you can verify that, that'd be good to know.
Getting back to that DC revenue, what was that again? They didn't make as much as they thought, but they...
Yeah, last year, or I'm sorry, in 2010, it was 1.3, and that was the last time I could find any data for that revenue.
Wow.
We could do some additional research too on more recent data on the revenue, as well as, since DC is so accessible to us, to find out through their staff what sort of hurdles they ran into in trying to implement this and how they might have done it differently.
But in answer to your question of a few minutes ago, I personally would be interested in getting into this and get the research that would be the basis for some legislation.
I think we agree on that.
Yep. So thank you for this. Good start.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we definitely will invite you back in the future if you want to contribute any more information.
You can have a bag lunch.
Or bagless lunch.
Director Gile, do you have anything else on this or general
Not on
updates?
this, just some general updates. As you know, we had, the Office of Environmental Policy had a $15,000 grant from the Chesapeake Bay Trust to produce conceptual drawings for green infrastructure on Main Street, and as part of that process, Campion Ruby designed some ideas that could be used both on Main Street for stormwater capture and cooling effect and aesthetics and encouraging, attracting visitors and consumers to Main Street and encouraging their longer stays. But these different types of green infrastructure ideas could be used anywhere in the city as well. So they produced some drawings, some renderings. We were required to hold 3 public meetings, which we did. Interestingly enough, from the businesses that did attend, they were not so opposed, they were not opposed to the idea of greening, and they actually liked some of the ideas and support pollution reduction and stormwater retention and reduction. But their biggest concern was what's going on with Hillman Garage. They're willing to talk about getting rid of some parking spaces to have bump outs for water infiltration and trees, as long as they know there's going to be sufficient parking in the city. And so our biggest takeaway from that whole process was we need to convey to the public a concrete plan for Hillman Garage.
Is the mayor's office listening?
No, actually, I talked to the mayor about this at lunch today, and it's going to be coming up in the CIP portion of the budget, which I think for the budget, the appropriations budget is pretty much locked in and locked up at this point. There'll be some switches of money a little bit for programs that the mayor wants to do, but mostly with the 4-year contracts. But the CIP, and the mayor said at lunch that Hillman is the linchpin. Hillman is the linchpin before we do the re-bricking. Nuisance flooding is before we decide on re-bricking. And Ellie, he said the thing you and I were talking about, just the 3 drains over on Dock Street and the one on Newman as an interim solution, just stopping them up and pumping the water. I think that because of the ULI study and the plans for City Dock, I think Hillman really is something that's going to happen sooner rather than later. And the thinking there is, if you want to take parking off of City Dock and or Main Street, you got to have a place for it to go, and Hillman is the likely candidate. That is flying a little bit in the face of the way you can make Hillman much more efficiently is ramp parking, so you can get a lot more cars in the same space and lower clearance room, but that doesn't lend to repurposing the building for apartments or office spaces or condominiums down the road. So if we somehow get into a world where we're teleporting or Uberizing, and we don't need the garage, we'll have to rebuild something there.
Where's that in the sector study?
Yeah, it isn't in the sector.
It's a very nice segue, Hillman Garage, into second topic. We are looking into adding electric charging stations to our city garages and city parking lots. There are a couple of grant opportunities we will be pursuing. One is Volkswagen money. That one, I believe, is due at the end of April. So Racing's going to take the lead on looking into putting together a grant for that, for charging stations. Then BG&E is meeting with me and David Gerald on Friday. They have grant money for different projects as well, and this one is electric vehicles, I think this is electric charging stations as well, so I'll have more to report on that next month. And then in our city code, we are supposed to be replacing our fleet with alternative fuel vehicles, and at the time that was written in 2009, we were thinking about, we weren't thinking about electric cars as much as different types of fuels. Now that's probably more about electric cars. So there are grant funds out there for purchasing electric cars as well, and even electric motorcycles. Howard County has, their police department has an electric car and 2 motorcycles now. And they really like them because they're so quick. They speed up so quickly, and they serve the purposes as far as range and holding a charge. So we can look into that as well through grant funds. I know it's not any part of the budget, but I've been given the green light by the city manager to go after funding for both cars and charging stations. The Annapolis Conservancy Board for this year is making it a priority to prioritize properties that they would like to put conservation easements on. Apparently this has been stopped and started a number of times, but with properties quickly dwindling within city limits, they understand the need for this, and this could all tie nicely into the mayor's plan for green spaces and green corridors and bike trails. Let's see. Oh, and the last thing is, both Alderman Savage and I met with Matt Johnston, who is the environmental policy specialist to County Executive Stuart Pittman, about collaborating on a number of different ideas. And one in particular, with some sense of urgency, is transboundary stormwater pollution. This has come to a head, particularly in light of the Key School athletic fields. They've had a lot of stormwater problems along Carrollton Road, and it goes through a system that ends up in Back Creek. So we've had other developments within city limits that have impacted county lands and waters. So we are working on, today, in fact, I was working with Matt Johnston on coming to get some sort of collaborative agreement where we would have notification to each other's jurisdictions. We would be copied on responses and citizen complaints that came in. And so we have to determine what our offices of law would like as far as what form of agreement that would be, whether it would be a memorandum of understanding or some other type of agreement. Yes.
What do you see your role? You heard the discussion about greenways in the discussion of the sector study.
Right.
I almost thought we had something at some point in the past that was, but how do you see your role in helping us formulate the greenway, which I also think can be attendant to bicycle paths? Right.
Well, I mentioned as the Conservancy Board, we put conservation easements on some of these greenway spaces so that they would be protected forever. And also how they are built. So we would have the environmental considerations, right, stormwater considerations, et cetera. They also present opportunities for tree planting and other types of plantings and stormwater management. So
tree banks.
Exactly, some planting sites.
So you would be partnering with planning and zoning on that?
Yes, and I've been brought into some of the discussions already the mayor's had on greenways and bike paths.
Who was, I was just curious on who's Matt and what is?
Oh, Matt Johnston is the Environmental Policy Specialist, is his title right now, with the County Executive's Office.
And he works for their Office of Howard?
Right now, he's a policy person in the County Executive's office. He's not with, they're contemplating whether to form a department or some other office for the environment, but that's still being studied. There's a work group, a task group looking at it.
That kind of rings a bell.
He said they'll be
I didn't mean to open that up. I was just curious on who he was.
I was waiting to see if you were going to ask that question.
He said they'll be issuing their final report on that in September.
Oh my gosh.
By September, I think it was.
Talk about bureaucracy. Oh, I mean, the final report on the restructuring?
On potential county restructuring, yeah.
Wow.
Because there's a lot to look at.
Yeah, I guess.
For us, it's a lot easier. Well, theoretically. Should be.
So he doesn't have a staff?
Not currently.
Okay.
Right. All right, anything else to report?
No.
Waterways Cabinet?
Waterway, oh, well, thank you for reminding me, yes. The Annapolis Waterways Cabinet, otherwise known as the Creeks Council, will have its kickoff meeting tomorrow from 10 to 11:30 here in City Hall. And we have about 20 participants if you include staff, and 13 participants that are stakeholder participants. Almost, I think all but one group so far is RSVP'd that they will be attending. So this is the group with the purpose of collaborating with the stakeholder groups to identify the biggest challenges and potential solutions and priorities to improve water quality in Annapolis city limits. So it includes our creeks and rivers.
She was asking if anybody's
Just wanna
going.
make sure we had
to-
Oh, and yes, you've designated, at the last meeting, you nominated Rob to be your participant, representative.
Seriously, if you can't go,
Right.
let me know.
Thank you.
And there,
I took
the,
off time.
right,
to
and
go.
The first one, yeah.
there is a representative from the Annapolis Environmental Commission and the Annapolis Conservancy Board as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you both, everybody. Racine, thank you. Let's see, do we have any other business, Takia?
I don't think so.
I entertain a motion to postpone discussion. Well, let's do the ID 389, discussion on topics for future meetings. Looks like our topic for the next meeting will be specific amendments for sector study. Is there anything else we need to bring up at that meeting?
Well, I just wanted to reiterate, I liked a lot of the ideas that Ellie brought forth, and I think in anticipation of our next committee meeting, we ought to try to share with each other, and I think I'm going to encourage the same thing for rules and the other committees. I think it would be interesting to hear what happened at the housing meeting. I'm kind of encouraged at the amount of attention that everybody's giving this. And frankly, I think we're making progress more rapidly than I thought we might. But I think Earl is emblematic of the kinds of concerns that are out there. And
Yeah, and I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of that kind of compromise, not making it an explicit amendment to the.
that's kind of what transportation was thinking of doing. You said you liked the ideas.
That's what I mean, you get this
Oh,
on
yeah.
Facebook and you're like,
I
what's
know, isn't that something? What transportation said, if I heard it correctly, was we like the concepts, we're just not sure we want to codify.
Yeah, I followed up with some more specific questions. It's coming back to transportation because Rhonda had,
She had a lot of comments too.
She took it to greater parole?
she did.
Did you
She
see her
spoke
list?
last night, Rhonda. I don't know if that went in the
Did you?
minutes or
Okay, I
what,
haven't
how you were
I haven't been
able
on
to.
email all day.
I don't.
Can't find her right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of good comments in there. Okay, anything for the good of the order you want to discuss?
Oh, it's somewhat related, I guess. Tonight is the kickoff for the ULI working team, and I don't have the thing, but I think there's a working group on green or environment. It's a city, somebody from the city
Are you
will be
on
there.
it?
I'm not on a working committee. I'm just sort of I call myself the marriage broker between Robert Clark and Gavin Buckley.
The Courtly Robert Clark?
There, I don't know if you read the RSA, whatever it is in the paper today, the editorial. The letter to its editorial that it was actually good. And it said this study may have some traction because of the partnership between the city and Historic Annapolis and the leadership of Eileen Fogarty, who has, she's a real dynamo. I think so anyway. So, it's hopeful. We'll see what kind of, what happens tonight. It's probably be a little chaotic, I think, because they're just kind of setting up and meeting each other as far as work groups and stuff.
Well, if there's anything you want to giving us an update on at the next committee meeting.
Yeah,
about
let me see how they're
environmental
gonna,
aspects,
exactly, yeah.
you're welcome to.
Yeah, it's good, because I think they don't, I'm trying to, when you talk about Hillman, I go to the ULI and say, does it say that? And it sort of does. It does, kind of want everybody on the same page with this ULI framework right now. It's not like it's a blank canvas. You know what I mean? It's like, it's sort of, the study itself is not much different than what that presentation was, orally. They just put it in writing. And so it's just about, probably 7 or 9 guiding principles that will be, I guess, just sort of narrowed down, and their recommendations. Gavin wants it, quickly. So this September, they're having sort of a 3-legged stool approach. Here's the idea. This is how it can be implemented, and this is how it, you know, where financing possibilities are.
So I talked to,
Since this isn't germane to the normal matters.
no,
Should
but
we
let me just tell you
motion
quickly, I
to-
talked to
yeah.
Bill Kardash today about it. And it's 5 things right now and 5 things later, so I'm going to call it the 5 and dime study.
Poor Bill. All right.
Move we adjourn?
Yeah, I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.